All right, everybody. Welcome to Node.js Tail Basics, an introduction to Node.js and Express. My name is Keith Chester, if you haven't met me before. You can find me on Twitter at @TheKeithChester. I'm usually complaining about politics and food, but every now and then I talk about tech, especially Node.js and robotic stuff and hardware. You can find me on GitHub at Halfshell, and that's actually where you can find this presentation and all of the presentations that I work on. So if you want to take a look at notes here or any of the code that we're going to be working with, it's all done and already on GitHub, so you can go look it up. And I'll try and remember to post this on the meetup page later. Of course, it'll be on YouTube later. And Keith Chester is where you can find me on Tech Slack. I'll explain that in just a second. But first and foremost, welcome to the Node community. It's something I've been trying to build up for the past 2 years. I went to Node Interactive in Portland, where I saw this incredible Node community come together from across the globe and talk about this new and exciting language that's been kind of taking over everywhere, proper ways to do things, and just learn about completely new frameworks and techniques that blew my mind. I watched a talk by some guy that was the head of Netflix debugging, talk about debugging the largest single source of internet traffic in the country live with a problem, where a downage problem means 10 million people are not getting what they want right now. Big deal. Fantastic time. Came back, no Node.js groups in St. Louis. So we said we had to fix it. So Node.js Tail is the solution to that. We meet at least once a month. We try to make good talks for experts and beginners, so everybody's going to be welcome there. We try to have open floor time like we did prior to this meeting, so if you have questions about your particular project or a problem you're having at work, that's the time to just come in, shout out that question, and hopefully someone here will have an idea. You guys can branch off and maybe work through that problem. And classes just like this, again, it's new. I want it to be a success, so I'm really going to be looking forward to your feedback after the fact. JSTL announced today. That's going to be coming soon with a brand new meetup. That's going to be generic JavaScript, so I'm going to consider that part of this community. Now, if you Google STL-Tech Slack, you'll get stltech.herokuapp.com. For those of you that don't know, Slack is a chat app where you can invite your team to talk on it. It's invite only, but that site will basically just send you an invite and you can join in. It has hundreds of developers throughout the city, not just Node coders, but literally any developer type throughout St. Louis are on there already. It's a huge chat. We have a Node channel, which is connected through something called Slackline to other Node groups throughout the country. So you have plenty of people ask your Node questions too. You can find me at Keith Chester underneath there, and I'm in a number of the channels there. When you join, you'll just be in everything, but there's a channel for pretty much every major language that you could think of, tons of different programs, hardware channels, all that. All right, so who the heck am I and why am I up here talking? Well, I'm not only just the organizer of Node.js, I'm actually someone that uses it. I'm head of research and development at Fusion Marketing, and I'm also an application developer there. And I have used Node. Actually, I've been featured by Node.js Foundation for my unusual use of Node, but I have used Node for virtually everything. Beer robots, heart rate monitoring, light controls, metal palm trees that take your picture. I'm working on mesh radio networking using Node right now. Robots, Wi-Fi tracking, augmented reality, some VR stuff, image manipulation. You name it, I've probably done it with Node. It's really cool, easy language to do quick prototypes with. And yeah, of course, I use it for websites, tablets, and APIs as well, because that's its heart and core. And tonight, we're going to be talking about Node and Express. But before we get into Node, I just want to go over a quick history of what the hell is Node and what it's history of. In 2009, a guy named Ryan Dahl announced Node.js at a conference that was not about Node, it's just some JavaScript conference. And he basically said, hey guys, I have this idea that uses Chrome's V8 engine, which was basically improved to be lightning fast JavaScript, right? I have this idea where we could basically use that to run a server. And he presented this idea and talked through it. And everyone was like, JavaScript as a server, haha, yeah, okay, this is a cute pet project. But 2 or 3 people from a company called Joyent realized that's a pretty good idea. So Ryan was actually unemployed at the time, and he got offered a job at the end of that conference to do nothing but work on Node. And he accepted, and now we have Node. He's actually moved on from the project. Joyent continues to work with the core maintenance group for Node.js. They're a major contributor there. And that's where Node comes from, just a random idea some guy had. So popularity-wise, it's exploded. This is jobs up to 2015. This is not including the last 2 years. Job growth for Node is purple. Other languages in there are like, I think this is Java. So there you go. We're doing pretty good on the job front. I mean, I have a job, anecdotal, but I have a job doing Node. There's a ton of places out there that you can do Node, and it's really, really in demand. There was one issue, though, during Node's history, and you're going to come across this as you start to explore packages for Node. There is some messiness with the actual maintenance of Node and deciding how things were going to move forward. And this caused Node to split between IOJS and Node.js. Thankfully, they made up, they rejoined. But if you read old documentation and you see something referring to IOJS, A, it's old because this was fixed like 2.5 years ago. And B, that's what they're referring to. Basically, anything IOJS could do, Node.js can do now, but better because it's been recombined after the fork. IOJS is considered dead now. Who's using Node? Well, lots of people. If you use Netflix web app at all, you're using Node because that's what the backend is. 100% of Twitter's mobile traffic, so all their app work is going through a Node.js Express app. What you're learning here tonight. 100% of one of the largest social networks in the world. Twitch TV uses Node heavily, and they're a heavy video provider just like Netflix. Microsoft is actually all in on Node. They're actually in the process of porting Node to ARM architecture so that Node can run very smoothly on small devices. And their Visual Studio Code, one of my favorite IDEs for Node, which I'll be using tonight, is completely written in Node. Amazon.com also uses Node quite heavily throughout several of its services. So, you know, the old saying, no one ever got fired for, you know, using IBM or buying IBM. Node.js is proven. It's no longer a weird language. Oh, JavaScript in the server, why would you want to do that? Plenty of people are using it, and plenty of people are using it quite successfully. So, let's do the hello world in Node. That's going to blow your minds. Can you guys see that back there? Pretty good? Okay. First, we're going to launch Node. Okay, good. We're in. And now, the hello world. Okay, done. So, you are now all Node programmers. Congratulations. Node is pretty easy to get into because it is a scripting language at heart. It is process-oriented. You can do object-oriented design in it, but it is process-oriented at its heart. And it is just going to execute your file and do what it can as quickly as it can. Of course, that is not the most useful hello world. Instead, let's take a look at this prepared example of a hello world using one of Node's core modules. Now, some of these terms and some of the modules you're not going to know right off the bat, and that's fine. We're going to cover them in a bit. But I'm going to read through this. All right, const. Who here knows what const is? Yo.
Constant.
Yep. So it's like var. One thing I should mention, ES6 stuff all works in Node. You don't have to worry about compatibility because you're not running this in a browser. It's running on your server. So if you want to use ES6 stuff, go right ahead. I'm going to try and avoid a lot of it, but I have a habit of using it. So sometimes you can see that out. What's up?
Are you doing let-in loops and all of that?
You can. I'm going to not do that tonight because I wanted this to be like as applicable to you guys as possible. I'm assuming that no one here knows ES6. I'm assuming minimal JavaScript knowledge here. So I pretty much, this is the equivalent of just saying var, but it can't be changed afterwards. So HTTP equals require. We're going to cover what that means in a second. HTTP, this is basically a module that handles HTTP connections. I'm going to create a server, right? Just calling http.createServer. And that server is going to have a callback. Whenever you pass a function into another function, the anonymous function style, that's generally called a callback. It's a style that's very, very common in Node because Node is asynchronous. We're going to cover more about that later. But what this is basically saying, I'm going to create a server, and that when you get a request in, I'm going to pass you a request object and a response object, right? And I want you to print request received. I want you to write a head to the response saying it's going to be a text, and you're going to say, hello, Node.js.tl. Right? That's my server. Then I tell the server to listen, and then I print that out. $9,001. I had it to 9,000. Hello, Node.js.tl. So that's simple. We just created a HTTP server in a couple lines. Now, quick pop quiz. Why is there 2 requests received? Favicon. There's that little icon for your bookmark bar. It always requests that the first time you go to the page. So that's why there's 2. But Was there a question there?
No, I was going to say it does that and then you're printing it.
Yep. So as soon as it hits for the favicon, because we're just doing for any request, it will immediately call that. So if I go to any route, it'll still return the same thing, and it'll hit twice. Because again, it's requesting the favicon again, because I didn't give it to it yet. Just a little tidbit there. So pretty simple hello world. Looking at the code again, we basically created a server object, set that server object with a response, told it to listen, and ran it. Now this, of course, is the world's simplest server. It's not terribly useful. But that is the hello worlds of Node. Pretty simple, and that kind of paints what you're going to be seeing a lot of. You're going to be seeing a lot of code where we're going to be writing it almost process-oriented, almost like scripting, and we're going to be writing things in terms of react when this situation occurs. That's very, very important in Node. Tend to approach towards event-based stuff. This is why Node is so good at certain applications. Like Node is great at prototyping robotics because react to sensor input. It's great at APIs. React when I get a certain request. Core modules. So back here, we used require HTTP. Well, HTTP is what's called a module. There's a bunch of modules within Node that already exist. FS is file system. If you want to access files or write files, that's FS. Path is handling just pathing within your file system, which sounds pretty simple until you think about, wait a minute, Mac and Linux uses one slash and Windows uses another slash, and then relative paths work differently and there's symlinks and so on. That handles all that for you. Utils has a bunch of different stuff in the crypto for passwords. HTTP we just used, HTTPS for handling encrypted HTTP, .NET for just raw connection sockets. If you want to handle UDP, for instance, you're probably going to end up using that. I mean, honestly, you'll probably find a module that does it for you. But if you wanted to build it from scratch, there you go. And a whole bunch of other ones. Everyone that you see is red is already loaded into your process. You don't have to require. So if I go into Node and type process, it's already going to be there. Console is already going to be there. And timers like set timeout, set interval, already there. And module. Module is another one that's already there. We're going to be using most of those tonight. There are other core modules out there. Some of them you're almost never going to use or you'll discover one day and be like, oh, hey, I didn't know Node could do that natively. But they're out there. But the strength of Node isn't necessarily the core modules that are built into the language and the program for you. It's every other module. Now, what does that require do before we get to those other modules? Require is basically a copy-paste of the code directly into that line. So if we were to look again at our Hello World example, what const HTTP is doing, it's basically calling up a file that has all the HTTP code on how to create and handle HTTP requests and create the server. And it's taking all that and it's pasting it into line 1. That's all it's doing. And it caches it too. So if I was to, in another file, while running this application, say, oh yeah, HTTP equals require HTTP again, it's cached, so it doesn't go ahead and load that again. It just saves memory there. And what that's doing is now I have all that JavaScript as if it was created in the same exact file, and I can access it there. So it's basically just a way to spread your code across multiple files and just have it be loaded right there where you need it. So you can do require if you don't put a path in there or it can't resolve the path. It's going to look into its Node modules folder, and we'll get to that in just a second. But if you do consider a path, it's just the path to your file relatively. So you can load your own files too. So as you write Node.js code, you don't all have to put it in one file. You can put it in multiple files and just require that in. And what it's actually looking for is this module, module that we mentioned earlier. That's already loaded into every single bit of Node code. So what you can do is, imagine these two parts are on the right are actually two different files, is you can basically define an important object, right? Tons of functions and variables within it. And then you just say module.exports equals my important stuff. So when this file is included via a require, that object is just thrown back to that JavaScript file that made the require, and it now has access to everything that it had. Likewise, another important pattern that we see a lot of is you can pass back a function too. So you see a lot of people that require and immediately call a function, or this allows you to pass things into the require. A good use case for that is, imagine for instance you had a file that defined out your database and you wanted to pass in like parameters, host name, password, username, and you can pass those in and return back a database object. Yeah?
So do you want to do that also to restrict or require those sort of parameters?
What do you mean by restrict require?
So you have those arguments as a way of requiring those specific arguments.
Yes.
Pass them to something.
Yeah. So basically, the reason you typically do that pattern is to make it so that someone has to prepare those requirements and pass it in so that you can properly build up the object that you want to do. So that's if you build your own modules. If you want your own to find modules that already exist, there's this great place called npm.js. Let's head there. npm.js has 400,000 modules. Now, once you get to anything that size, of course, there's going to be bad modules in there, but there are tons and tons of modules that are easily searchable. And they also throw in a little command line application helper to help you with that, which I'm going to show you in just a second. There's a question?
Yes. Do you, let's say in production, in your live environment, do you use these pre-built modules, or, you know, because the reason I'm asking is, it's going to depend on, for that person updating that module. So what if they stop doing it, you know?
Great question. So the question is, do I depend in production on these modules? The answer is yes. But anytime you bring in public code, open source, right, into your production code, it is on the developer to basically establish whether or not that code is tested well, whether or not that code is safe, and whether or not that code is going to be maintained, or if, worst case scenario, they're able to take maintenance over on it. If you design your code to be modular enough, you can usually just pick out a module and drop another one in its place. So yeah, I mean, this is perfectly safe. I've built dozens of apps using this. In the back?
I would suggest, if you're not to the level where you can look at the code and judge for yourself, a great feature of NPM is you can see like how popular the module is. So, you know.
Exactly. Let's take a look at that.
When you see something that's like extremely popular, sure people have vetted it.
Exactly. So for instance, tonight we're learning about Express, which is a module on here. I just typed the word Express, and if we take a look, here's the Express module. This is what we're going to be using tonight. There were 523 downloads today for Express. Something tells me that's a very reliable project, right? Question?
Right here. If it fails, how gracefully does it fail?
Depends on what the failure level is.
Module, it's no longer there. What does it get back to you?
So this is actually getting a question of deploying Node.js and how you would handle catastrophic failures. Depends on the level of the failure, depends on what kind of failure, and depends on your architecture of deployment. So it's a very complicated question we're not going to get into until much later. But typically Node.js is hosted in such a way that you basically cluster it out onto one machine and then spread that horizontally across multiple machines. So if you do have catastrophic failure, it will just die and come back up, and then everything gets spread out amongst the other parts of the machine. Paul?
I was going to say two things about kind of related to all that. Number one, if the package were to fail, it's strictly because of a technical issue at this point. You cannot unpublish packages for the VM after 24 hours. There's a reason for that. But the second thing is, if you're worried about security or vulnerabilities in these specific packages, there is a program that Node Foundation just brought in called Node Security Project, and you can actually scan your package.json for vulnerabilities.
Okay.
As well as there's also third-party services which are a little more robust, like if you want to actually like have monitoring or something of packages online or private packages.
Yeah, that's kind of the basis of my question, is both the security and availability. Because I know that there was a couple of years ago, in some other aspect, where a very basic package tray system was unpublished.
You're talking about LeftPad. You can no longer unpublish. That is exactly the use case he's talking about that prevented that from occurring.
The other part of that was where if somebody abandoned something and somebody else came along and picked it up and then started injecting malicious code in it.
So you cannot publish without having the password or being approved by the publisher.
No, that's what I'm saying, exactly. Somebody abandoned it, gave it over to somebody else, sold it to somebody else, and then they started injecting malicious code into it.
I mean, that can happen with any package manager. At that point, it depends on the developer.
I'm wondering how it got handled.
So it depends on each application. We're actually going to be moving on and moving that to a discussion later.
That's fine.
So npm.js is not just a website, it's also in your command line. And when you install Node, these days it will just come with npm. And npm, should probably spell it correctly. npm is a useful little guy that will basically go out and handle everything you need to know for your packages. So in this example, I'm going to go ahead and install Express. So what it's going to do is it's going to go out to the internet, which I hope I have a great connection, and then it's going to pull down everything it needs for Express. And if I do ls node modules, it pulled down everything Express needs and Express itself, because Express has its own dependencies, and took care of all those dependencies for me instantly, like that. So now I have Express on this machine. So npm also is great for starting a project. Let's see, do I have package.json here? No, okay. So when you get started with a Node project, create a little folder and type npm init. And it's going to ask me a couple questions. What's the name of my project? Hi there. Version number, we're not very far. It'll ask you for a description, entry point, usually index.js, but you can do whatever you want. Test command, we're not writing tests tonight. Repo, keywords. This, of course, these questions are basically, if you're going to go ahead and publish this to the npm repository, you're going to want to fill out the description, the keywords, your author information, and license information. But for most of your private packages and projects, you're going to just go ahead and just not answer those or just leave them blank. And what that does is that goes ahead and creates a package JSON. That package JSON is the heart of every single Node project, and pretty much step one whenever you start Node. And its primary use is, if you see it, dependencies, it already listed it because I installed Node Express earlier. It's gone ahead and already listed my dependencies. So this way, when I save this on GitHub, I don't save Express and all the modules that I included with it, because that's a huge amount of code that I'm needlessly saving to Git. I save just the package JSON, and so in the future, whenever anybody pulls down my package or my project, they can just do npm install, and it'll pull down all the dependencies that project needs to run. And just like that, they have their entire environment set up. So that's npm init, that's npm install. Let's talk about the event loop. I have a great example for this. I thought I had a great example for this. Okay. Here it is. So what actually happens when I run this file? Anybody want to venture a guess? What does it print out? Well, I think most of us would probably assume hello world, because that's the phrase. But why? Why does it not print world hello? And the answer is because Node is asynchronous. What's up?
The console.log should hit in process before the response from reading the file comes back with console.log world.
Exactly. So basically he's saying that this callback is being processed after this console log hello. So what happens is, well, Node is single threaded. It's going to execute each of these lines of code. Consider it 3 through 4, essentially one line of code, right? Because this is within this main function call. And it's going to execute these lines of code as it goes. When it executes the read file, it's basically doing something where it throws back to the thread pool. Now, anything that accesses the file system, processes, this is where you basically get your C libraries and bindings in there. Other programs that you may be executing, like ImageMagick if you're doing image manipulation. Anything that deals with network, if it's going out to HTTP or it's connecting to a database, or any process like that, hits a thread pool. And it basically does it in such a way that it adds it to an event loop. Node is constantly checking that event loop on, do you have anything for me to do? Do you have anything for me to do? All right, I'm going to do you. Okay, now do you have anything for me to do? And it's just like how timers work within the browser, where they're basically going to stack up. And as soon as it can, it will execute whatever's next in the event loop. So in this example, what happens is we bring in FS, which we talked about earlier. That's the file system module through require. We call the read file function within it, and we're reading some text file. And when that function comes back, this is called error first callback, by the way. Very common in Node. So basically, we always check to see if there is an error. It's the first thing passed back to you. Through that, we get the data contents from that file, and then we're going to print out the word world. But what actually happens is it goes, read file, okay, throw that into the loop. Then print out, hello. Okay, I'm done with everything I'm executing. Let's go back to the event loop. Oh, I'm done reading the file now. Call that callback. Follow? Any questions on that? What's up?
What if you have multiple read files? How do we know the order in which one is being printed? If you want to control the order.
That's complicated. Let's say that we were reading 3 different files, right? There's absolutely no way to guarantee without special logic that you're going to get back in a certain order. And this is something you're going to have to get used to in Node. Node is asynchronous to its core. And if you write blocking code, you're going to see the productivity and speed of Node just plummet. Instead, you're going to have to either get used to writing in a certain style in which you don't know when that's going to come back, or you're going to have to use special logic modules, and they are out there, which will control that order and basically prevent it from coming back at a certain time, or alternatively, force you to not fire off certain things until another thing is done. But we'll get to that in a bit. Any other questions?
So you said it single-threaded, but asynchronous.
Yep. Yep. Sounds confusing, single thread and asynchronous, but because of the event loop, it is asynchronous based. Yes?
How does it manage to be completely non-blocking while using that event loop?
Great question. So basically, whenever it's hitting anything in the file system network process, it's on its own kind of thread. It spins up its own thread. So if I request if I run a program like ImageMagick to manipulate a file or an image on my file system, that's not Node doing that. That's Node firing off a child process that's going to go ahead and execute this. And when that child process is done and returns, I'm then going to deal with it. There's other modules out there that directly bind into C++, like Serialport or the OpenCV library for Node. And what those do is they basically fire off a different thread and then come back. This means that your main thread only job is to continually check that event loop and execute JavaScript as quickly as it can.
Offload those tasks to other child.
Exactly. One of the primary rules with Node when you get to the higher levels is basically never, ever, ever, ever write blocking code. There is a read file sync function, for instance. It will block the event loop until it reads that file. Should you use that on your web server? Absolutely not, because nothing will get processed. Not a single request coming in will get processed until that file is read. Now, is it useful? Yeah, you do that when you do your initialization. Oh, I need to read this configuration or this cert file so I can authenticate against my database. That's when you do that. But when it comes to handling requests, do not write blocking code. That'll make more sense as you kind of work with Node more and see blocking code versus non-blocking. So, now that we've covered kind of the basics there, let's do a Hello World in Express. I've gone ahead and I've installed Express into this folder Hello World, and we started package.json for it. I also have, well, I don't know what I just typed. Don't save. Okay, so Express equals require Express. Because we have the module Express in our Node modules, we installed it. So Express is now that whole big object that's going to basically handle anything. It's the entire Express framework. I'm going to create an app and execute Express. That creates an app. That's just how Express works. And I'm going to call app.getStar, and I'm going to put a callback function request. Instead of saying request response, I'm just going to use req, res. That's actually very common amongst Node. You'll see that all the time. I'm going to tell the app to listen. So let's give that a run. Refresh, hello world, and we execute it. And this time we see, hey, favicon. Yeah, it was hit. So what the hell is happening here? An app in Express is basically just one server. You can have multiple apps within an individual Node program if you're listening on multiple ports, but most people never ever do that. 90% of the time you just have one app, and that's going to basically handle all of your requests and all of your routing. Instead of before, like we did on the HTTP Hello World, we basically said everything, no matter where you go, hits a server. I'm going to handle that request all the time with just this one function. Express has built-in routing that basically takes care of breaking out your server into a nice little API. Now I use star. That just means catch everything. I could have easily said /users. That means a GET request to /users. I want you to execute this function and pass me the request, and here's the response object that you can now respond to. That could easily have been /users/star. What's up?
So you can just write all of your logic for handling the routes into your get when you're keeping the args in like that?
Yeah, you could write all the logic for that one route. So if I just wanted to just say for /users, have a particular piece of route logic there, I could just write down all my logic for that route right here, and that's everything that's going to be called whenever that route gets hit.
But I mean, in the body of your get, if you just had the args in your arguments back to the star instead of the defined route. So I'm asking, how are you handling the routing then if you're just getting anything?
Express is handling it for you. The example I used was getting everything because I used star. But typically what you actually do is you do a particular route.
Okay.
Right? And then if I have another route, so app.get books,
Okay, got it.
I would write an entirely different function.
Okay.
So what starts to happen here is you start to see that I can just write a file called users.js, write out a get function and a post function for every possible route that I'm going to need for my users, and then require that into this. So let's just pretend I had that users.js. I could just say var users equals require, and I can pass app over to it because I created app up here.
Okay.
Right? And what that's going to do is it's going to pass into a file the app object, and then I can just call app.get /users /user ID, etc., and define a bunch of routes around that one object. So that was a hello world, but we kind of got ahead of ourselves there. Let's go back to just routing. So Express has built-in method functions for every single HTTP verb. There's 16 of them. I can't name them all. I can maybe do 8 or 9 before I completely forget some. But let's be honest, 99% of what you're going to do every day is get, post, put, and delete. And even then, it's going to be get and post and put for 90% of what you're going to do. So you can just call app get, app put, post, app put. If you want to have it catch all routes, no matter what the method, use .use, right? And you can use /address or /users, whatever route you want it to be, /users /something, etc. And it always calls with a function, rec, and res. Now the question becomes, how do you handle routes that aren't necessarily predetermined and static? Well, let's take a look at a couple different route examples. Let's pretend that this is a file that Express loads up, and we have app already declared and Express is brought in. So in our first example, we have app.get /user. We saw that earlier when I was talking about the example. That means any request to /user that's a get is going to call that function. Then we have app.get /user : user ID. This is called a parameterized route. Basically, anything that you put after /user/, assuming that it doesn't have anything after it, is going to be read as a parameter. And it's going to be passed to you under the request object as rec.params. So in this example, because I know it's user ID, I can call rec.params.user ID, and I'll get that value back. So if I get called with /user/42, because that's my user ID, I can say rec.params.user ID. I now know what user is being hit specifically. Now, app.get/user/create, that will never be hit. Why?
Because create will be the user ID.
Exactly. Express is done in order. It's going to try and check it versus the first route you declared to the last route you declared. As soon as it finds a match, it's done. /create matches user ID. So when you call /user/create, it'll call /user/user ID. How do you solve that problem? Declare app.get /user/create first. Problem solved. because remember, it's always going to be in the order that it's declared. And another note down here is parameterized IDs. You can do multiples within a single route. And it won't have that problem of being caught by /user ID because it's basically looking for those slashes when it does the checking. So it will know that something like this does not match that parameter. Also, I'm not really good at regular expressions, but if you are, regular expressions work in here too. Any questions on the routing?
I was going to ask, like, what if you did want to make sure user ID is a number? It sounds like a regular expression might be a way to...
You could totally do that with a regular expression. Another way is to, well, anything that gets passed here is going to be a string, right? So if you are checking for a number, you will have to do a parse int, and then you can basically check, oh, is this a number? If not, I can just respond with like, oh, this is a bad request. This is not any good.
If you want it, like, what if you're like, oh, it's not a number, we'll then continue on to check other routes. But so that might be...
That is using something we're going to cover in just a bit. So great question. So the question was basically, what if you want to have some kind of validation on the route, but then have it move on to other routes if it failed validation? There's something called middleware. We're going to cover that in a bit. So that rec-res object, what's in it? This is pretty much 90%. There's a ton of attributes on this. This is 99% of what you're ever going to use. I'm hard-pressed to think of things I've used outside of these. Original URL is basically what was I called with that actually called this onto here. That's useful for when you're doing rerouting stuff. Params you saw earlier, that's the parameterized route variables. Hostname is what your hostname is. This is kind of useful if you're deploying an app across multiple domains. Method is just what HTTP verb were you called with. Remember, you can use .use to basically catch all of them. So you don't necessarily know it's a .get already. You don't know if it's a .post. If you want to react a certain way based on the method, you can do that. .is and .get are literally the worst named functions in the world. Not descriptive at all, but very useful. .is a function that if you call, it will check whether or not that is the same content type. Sounds confusing, but basically, you could go rec.is application JSON, and it'll tell you true or false whether or not the request is that type. Terribly named function, but very useful. .get is another terribly named function, but very useful. .get and a string returns the header that matches that name. So basically, it's how you check your headers. Rec.get authentication token tells you the authentication token header that was passed on that request, for instance. Cookies and body. These are different colors because you actually have to bring in, as of Express, I want to say 4, you have to bring in a separate module to handle these, but they are so common that most people bring them in anyway. And I'll show you how to do that in just a bit. Cookies is just like what it sounds. It basically handles the cookies that were on the request, so you can check to see, is this user of the correct session ID that I gave them? I gave the user a cookie of whether or not they were over 18 or over 21. I can check it here. Rec.body, if you have a piece of middleware that basically gets you the body of the request, if someone does a post to you and posts a bunch of information, like from a form, rec.body is going to be where that information is. We're going to talk more about that rec.body specifically in just a minute. Those res object has a ton of attributes as well. The only ones you're probably going to use most of the time is res.send, res.end, and res.status. .send, anything you pass into it, it'll figure out a way to send it back. You pass it a buffer or a stream, which you'll learn about later in Node, it'll pump that out. If you pass it a string or a JavaScript object, it'll send it back as either a text or as application JSON response. Very nice and easy. .end just ends the request with no body whatsoever. Useful for when you just want to kill the request, like, oh, you're not allowed to be here, .end. And status is where you basically change the HTTP status code. If you just respond without doing anything, it's always going to be 200. If I want to say, oh, no, you're in the wrong area, or I don't know where that user is, I'll say res.status 404.end. And that will respond with a, oh yeah, this is a 404, that user's not there. It's a very common way of writing APIs. Yes?
So if you, let's say you have two, you were setting out two, like hello and then world as like separate strings. Would you have to combine, like, can you only call send once?
Nope.
Or can you call send over and over?
You can call send as many times as you want. You can only set the headers up until the first send. And this is just HTTP protocol rules. You cannot change headers after the headers are done sending and you begin sending the body. You can, however, call send a bunch of times, but once you call end, or once you stop calling send and that function thread kind of dies, it'll close the connection and send it out. All right, so middleware. Back to the question of middleware, which came up earlier. Middleware is based on the fact that I kind of lied to you earlier. Earlier I said that Express is going to call function rec res. It's actually passing 3 attributes, rec, res, and next. Except if you're at the very last tidbit of your function, the last bit of your route, you're never going to deal with next. These functions, app.get, app.use, actually accept n functions, and it will chain those together. And here's our example with the world's worst authorization software. So basically, I have app.get/secret/files. This is where I'm going to store all my secret documents. I have a function, rec res next, right? And it basically says if rec.get, which remember gets the header, super secret auth token, if that is equal to the word super secret code word, then call next. Otherwise, res.status 401.n. Res.status sets the status code to 401.n, kills it. 401 is a common status code for you're not authorized to see this. So if they do have the code word, they are authorized to see it, call next. That will go to the next function. And it passes the same rec and res object. So fs.read file, super secret document.text, error first callback, pass that data, and send it to the user. And my secret is out there. So now someone with the secret code in their header is going to be able to get that file data, but someone without it will get bounced. Middleware is really simple concept, especially when painted in such a simple light, but it's essentially what powers Express and what makes it so powerful. There is tons of middleware out there that's going to make your life a lot easier. There are things, for instance, that just check to see whether or not the request came in on HTTPS. If you're doing an API, and you want to force your users to be secure, you're going to want to avoid HTTP calls. So there's firm middleware out there that will check to see is this an HTTPS call, and if not, we'll send a 304 basically tell them, no, you have to come back to this address, which is the HTTPS version of it, and not allow that to process through. There's authorization and authentication modules out there that basically make it easy for you to prevent people accessing things that you don't want them to access. And tons and tons of middleware out there, so many uses. A great one that I mentioned earlier is Body Parser. So someone posts something to your site or does a put to your site with data in the response or request, you're going to want to be able to read that data. Express out of the box doesn't have anything to do this. It's not because they can't make it do that. In fact, it used to. It's the fact that they want you to be able to choose what middleware you want to put in there so that you can directly configure how to deal with the information coming in. So how do I get Body Parser? Well, just like Express. You type npm install, you hope that your internet is still connected, and then boom, you have it. So how do you use it? That line 2 should see var app equal, or it should say var body parser equals require body parser. My mistake, sorry. I did not proofread that slide apparently. So app.use, .url encoded, .json, .text. What are these doing? Who knows what URL encoded requests are? In the back.
That's where it's basically encoding that your web browser is going to use to send form data.
Yep. Very, very, very common amongst forms. If you use jQuery Ajax, that's how it's doing it by default, unless you tell it otherwise. What it's basically doing is, you ever see a URL route which ends in question mark, var1 equals this, and that's URL encoded. So what this piece of middleware does, bodyparser.url encoded, is translate that for you. So you don't have to do anything for it. If it passes to you, rec.body is a nice JSON object of the values that were passed to you. If you're dealing with application type JSON, JSON content type, which you see a lot in mobile apps, then you bring in the JSON body parser. And really, if you bring in those first two, you can deal with like 90% of the requests that are coming your way. That's what I use almost every day. So .text basically just parses everything coming in as text, and .raw is kind of getting deprecated. It's just a raw byte stream of what's coming in. What's up? Oh yeah, it's back there and take a left. So body parser, very useful piece of middleware. There's tons of other ones out there. Molter is for handling files. Obviously, when files come in, you're going to want to know how to deal with them. You're going to want to specify where to save them. You're going to want to limit, well, I'm going to allow JPEG, so no, I'm not going to take that executable file. I have certain file size limits. This all gets handled by Molter, and it just sits in front of your Express route, so you can basically say, when someone tries to upload a file to this, make sure it fits these rules, otherwise bounce them. Cookie parser we talked about earlier, that basically handles your cookies coming in from the requests. Cookie session is similar, but it has a built-in session variable, so you can keep track of users easily that way. CORS, who knows what CORS is?
Cross-origin resource sharing?
Cross-server requests.
Yes, cross-origin requests, basically. So if you're building an API server that's going to be hit by, say, mobile devices, you need to set your CORS to be a little more permissive than you're used to on a website. Yeah. So basically, if you're on Chrome and you try to hit an API, and you're at www.mywebsite.com, and you try to hit an API that's from www.yourwebsite.com, if the CORS aren't permissive, Chrome will just shut down that AJAX request and say, no, I'm not going to allow this. So that's why you set CORS. Express.static, super useful. We're going to use that one in just a bit when we do our sample app. That's basically just serving static files. For instance, JavaScript, CSS files, views, and HTML pages. Timeout is one that basically you can plug into your Express just like we did for body parser. And what it ends up doing is setting a timeout limit. So if this request takes more than 4 seconds, kill it. Close it down. Don't let it process anymore. Morgan is for logging. It actually logs out all the HTTP requests coming in. And Passport handles a lot of authentication stuff. I build a lot of authentication stuff in-house, but Passport is very popular. So if you're not sure what you're doing on that front, very, very safe to just use that one. Any questions before I move on? Okay. Yeah.
Is there any built-in debugging middleware?
Yes. Node has a built-in debugger, and a lot of IDEs have a built-in feature for debugging. We can show that off towards the end.
But it's not a middleware, right?
No, it's not a piece of middleware, but it's actually part of the Node program. Okay. So, static content. Oh, I told you we'd talk about it later. So, this is a perfect example. Let's say I have a directory called static in my application, and that's just going to have like subfolder for JavaScript and CSS and image files. Well, create Express, create an app for Express, app.use, remember it hits every single method. If you don't specify the route, it just hits everything. And I pass express.static and I tell it, serve this folder statically. So anything inside that folder can be reached at now, like /static/ whatever. And it's a great, easy way to serve static content. So template engines, we're not going to use one tonight because I didn't want to have to teach a template engine, but they're very popular. Dust.js, Handlebars, and Pug, the one with the best logo. Pug was also known as Jade. If you ever see anybody talk about Jade on forums, that is Pug now. They got sued by some company named Jade, which has nothing to do with web tech. I have no idea why that went through. But these are all great ways to basically inject into a web page that you're about to serve up specific variables. So if you want a web page to say, hi, Keith, and you basically can create a page with hi user.name, and then you call the template engine and basically save it to serve up index.html, and for the variable, you're going to have user.name equals Keith. And it'll go ahead and generate that for you. Express has complete support for template engines, including everyone I have here, and quite a few I don't have listed because I don't use them that heavily. And what's up?
What's EJS?
EJS is, yeah, it's easy JavaScript templating. I forget what it stands for. I've never used it. I have seen it though. It's another templating engine though.
Which engine do you like?
When I do use one, I use Pug, but based on my job, I have moved away from doing a lot of front end. So I do mostly just APIs now. So Express has built-in support for these engines, app.set view engine. And in this example, I'm setting it to Pug. Of course, you have to go ahead and go install Pug. And it's going to go ahead and grab Pug for you, put it into your node modules.
Now, do you ever do that dash save?
So, great question. If I do this, it will just install it. But after the package.json is made, if I do dash save, it will actually update the package.json to include that dependency. So I don't have to go and modify it. And also list the version that was active when I downloaded it, which is great because when I come back 3-4 months later and there's been 5 more versions of that, I can still pull that exact version down and know it's going to work out of the box with no changes. So if you have Pug installed, internet's being a tad bit slow right now, you can just say app.set view engine Pug. You don't even have to require it. Express will go ahead and do that. So what it will do is it'll add a render function over to your response object. And you can just say res.render. And it's looking in a folder called views by default. You can change that setting, of course, but by default it looks in /views. So if I have index dot, what's Pug? It's index.pg. So it looks for a file called index and it'll pass in that variable. And then it'll just generate that HTML file and pump it out, completely customized to the data that you have. Questions on that? Okay. We're not using one of those tonight just to save time. So APIs, serving up web pages is cool, but eventually you're going to have to deal with databases. And Node is really good at a lot of different databases. A lot of people like Mongo and Mongoose on top of that. Mongo is a database that's pretty much handled where everything is a JavaScript style object. And Mongoose pretty much extrapolates that into an ORM that's really easy to use. People love that, and you see that in tons of tutorials. I hate the fact they use it in tutorials because everyone here, in terms of databases, probably knows SQL, and I don't want to have to learn a new database in order to learn a new language. Is Mongo good to know? Yeah, kind of. A lot of people debate that fact. But there's other databases out there, too, that are not SQL that Node is really good at. Neo4j is a graphing database, really cool if you ever work with graph data. Redis, CouchDB, DynamoDB, all NoSQL alternatives. But most of you probably work with SQL libraries or SQL databases. And for that, you have quite a few choices. Just 3 right off the belt is Bookshelf and Sequelize are ORMs. You guys know what ORMs are? Yeah. Object relational models, right? Yeah. So basically that just simplifies the database code for you and makes it nice and easy to do. Connects.js is my personal favorite because I'm not a huge fan of ORMs. I can understand why you would use them. I prefer just to do the database queries directly. What that does is it creates a promise-based framework for parameterizing database queries really easily. And we'll take an example of that in a minute. Actually, Bookshelf.js is built on Connects.js. There's other ones out there, but the point is that no matter what your database choice is out there, Node has some way to connect to it. So here's an example connects query. So basically, I require connects, which we install. Yeah, I'm not going to run that install because that was slow. You install npm install connects, and then you say connects equals require connects. And then we create a DB object where I basically just define what the variables are. Now, remember when I was talking about core modules that are automatically loaded? Process was one of them. What process.env means is I want the environment variable database_host. I could just as easily type in 127.0.0.1, but sometimes when you design apps, you're going to want to use environment variables a lot so that when you go ahead and switch environments, it will just automatically know the parameters that's going to have to connect to the database to. This is a tip that when you design these things for production, for real things you're going to be using in your job, you're going to want to use process.env. So you create the database object, and then if I go ahead and make a query, lines 14 through 19 here, it's basically promise-based parameterized. So it's really easy. DB table name, .where, the attributes that you're checking. It'll also accept a JavaScript object if you're doing multiple attributes. You could also do .orwhere, .endwhere, and a whole bunch of other things on there. And .as callback, error first callback, function error results. And results will be basically an array of kind of a JavaScript object of your return. Any questions on that? Okay, so you now know templating templating engines, you know the basics of Express, you know the basics of Node, you know the basics of installing stuff, using modules, writing your own modules, middleware. So you're all pretty much experts at Node and Express now. But learning the basics and then applying them is completely different. So this is the part that I'm terrified of. We're going to try to do some live coding. If this goes terribly, terribly wrong, I will basically go and switch to a pre-written version that I already have done. I apologize in advance for if this goes wrong. So I'm going to ask for a lot of audience participation on this bit, not just to call me out when I'm making a stupid mistake, like misspelling things, but also just to answer questions to see, like, did you guys catch on? Or let's see what people managed to learn tonight. So, all right, I have my function here. I'm going to create a directory called, or what are we going to call it? Crappy Twitter clone. Okay. Great start. How do I start a Node project? Yep, npm init. Okay, I'm just going to hit it. Oh, no capital letters. Just going to hit enter a bunch of times, do the defaults. All right, we're good there. And we know we're going to be writing an Express app. Is there anything else I should install now? Yeah.
What's the deal with no capital letters?
That is probably because of how npm.js is storing it. I don't know why that rule came about, but that's just a rule. So what else should I install other than Express? We know we're going to be accepting, Okay, so I'm going to install Connects and just MySQL so it knows how to connect to a MySQL database because I already have that installed and running because I cheated. And we know we're going to have to accept stuff from users in terms of an API. So yeah?
Let's grab
Body parser, yep. All right, so we're going to go ahead and save those, and that's going to write it onto our package.json. While that's going ahead and saving, I'm going to close this down. And let's go ahead and go into our package.json, which is still doing the install. And we're going to create index.js. So we have the start of our app. That's going to take a minute to install. So while that's installing, how do we start an Express app? You require Express. And then you create an app just like that. Pretty easy. And eventually we have to tell that app to listen on a certain port. Pretty easy so far. So I want to serve some static content. Okay, good. We're all installed here. And just to show, that installed all those libraries that I requested. If I go back to my package.json, my dependencies have been updated. So these are the exact versions that was requested from npm.js. So if I come back in 2 years, I can go to npm.js and pull those exact versions again. Of course, if you're doing a production app, eventually you're going to have to set aside time to say, let's review these dependencies and see, are there updates? Can we do the update neatly? Are there security concerns? But that's something for another day. So, index.js, let's serve up some static content. Now I'm going to cheat. I already wrote the HTML page, and I don't want to write it again. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this folder static into here. Now what's in here? Some CSS, single HTML page, and some JavaScript, index.js, which is going to be our main page JavaScript, and jQuery, just to handle some of the crap for us. So how do I serve up this static content? So we know it's a piece of middleware, so I'm just going to say app.use. And it's express.static. So what dir name is doing is it's just referring to my local directory that I'm executing this node from. So if you want to say, to text something in a local directory, use dir name. So there you go. So static. And I'm going to serve this up so that whenever I hit /static, middleware of express.static is going to handle it. Let's bring in body parser. Oop. All right, so middleware, I just want to kind of handle all requests. So I'm just going to use app.use. I'm not even going to use a route. And I'm going to say bodyparser.json and bodyparser.url, encode it. The extended bit is what engine to use. If you know nothing about it, just use false. That'll serve you as well 99% of the time.
Is that this, if you had just used a star as the route, is that the same as just not having a route at all?
Yep. Basically, without having a route, it matches everything. Having the route matches everything. Using a use matches every method. So that's pretty good so far. Let's see. Does it crash miserably? No. Hey, great start so far. What happens when I go to port 9000? Anyone want to guess?
Blank page.
Yeah, nothing, or close enough. Cannot get slash. No routes were matched. This is a default response from Express. If it can't match it, just can't match it. All right. Nothing didn't crash though, so that's a plus. We're working towards it. But if I go to slash static slash CSS slash main.css, got our CSS file. So we are serving those static files. That's great.
I believe you, but can I just see what the directories, what the folder looks like?
Sure.
What
Here is crappy Twitter clone, and we have a static folder here. CSS, JS.
okay, so that's actually where like the node mouse and all that is.
What was that statement?
So I just come from the PHP world where it's like Apache is the server, so it's just like always weird for when I see node stuff to be like, wait, the program that is the server is like in the directory that my files are in?
Yep.
So just kind of get a little more familiar with that.
You can put them elsewhere, but very common for them just to be in the same place because you want them to basically be ported together. All right. So we're serving the static content, but we're not serving that main page. That main page is in static views index.html, but I want it served when you go to slash. So let's write something for that slash. Let me close this. All right. Res.send file. It's a very simple way. Just sends a file. Yep. So I'm just going to respond with that. Let's see if that works, or if I introduced a bug somewhere. Hey, great. So we have our crappy Twitter clone up. All right, except if I open up the dev console, right, and I hit send, it's going to error out. Why? Well, because the API isn't written yet. We haven't done that. Yeah. So the two routes that we're going to have to write right now are /tweets, which is a GET request. And what that's going to do is it's going to hit our database and just get all the tweets. You know, our crappy Twitter clone doesn't have a lot of users. We don't have to worry about a billion tweets. We have to worry about maybe 5. So let's write that route first. So app.get /tweets. Function recres. Okay, so we need a database. I've already created one, but we need to bring it into our application. And I'm going to create a DB. This is the first time I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go ahead and look up what I have to do. Sometimes you just won't remember what the attributes you need are. All right, don't tell anyone my super secret database stuff. All right, I trust you guys. It's not public, don't judge me. All right, I believe that's what it is. So we're looking at the database important opinions for our crappy Twitter clone. We have user root password, and I'm looking locally for it. And I have it running, I checked it earlier. All right, so that gets us our database. And we have /tweets. So now let's use connects that I brought in earlier, and let's do a let's just query to see what we got. So DB, actually, is that the database name? Oh, okay. Good thing I checked. Twitter clone is the database. Important opinions is the table name. So to show you guys, I have show databases, use Twitter clone. I have this select star from important opinions. I have a couple tweets already in there, just for this example. So db.important opinions.
Yeah, I saw that.
Good catch. All right, so .where, what am I looking for? Well, actually, if you don't include a .where, it just calls everything. It selects stars. As callback, function error first thing, results. All right, if there's an error, something has gone hideously wrong. So let's react to that. Let's serve the user, tell the user, hey, something went wrong. So we're gonna, if error, res.status 500, and let's send the error back. Else, res, by default, it's 200, so I'm not going to set the status here. Else send results. All right, so if something goes wrong and it can't connect to the database or the database crashes, it's going to send a 500 back up. So let's see how this reacts. Didn't work. 500, hey. So if we go into sources, let's just see what went wrong real quick, and if it's something we can fix in 20 seconds. Tweets. Can it handle null input? We're just getting something, so it should technically just get that. Get tweets for each console log. All right, this is why I did it ahead of time. Complete project models. Tweet. So that bit. So I did get all and then an index. No, I did it the same way. Oh. Oh, I probably did the. Let me see if I screwed that up. Oh, hey, wow, error. I should have read that first. DB is not a function. Okay, that would be why. So hopefully that copy pasta just fixed that. Hey, we got tweets back. So our API is up and running, and we have one route on it, other than the one that serves the page and all the static content, .get tweets, right? So a get to /tweets will return that data. And actually, let's take a look at that. There's a very ugly formatted JSON object of all the tweets that came back on that route. Okay, so we have a tweet stream, but that's not really interesting. It's not interesting until my opinion is added to it. So let's go ahead and write that. So we know that when you send data to something, you don't use a get because you can't attach body data to the get. You typically use a post or a put. So let's just do a post. And I already have a route for this where it's post the tweets. Okay, that's simple to remember. So when you post the tweets, it's going to go ahead and it's going to post your tweet to the database. So because we have body parser, I know that there's going to be a rec.body body attribute on the request, and it's going to have all the values. So let's go ahead and just console log rec.body so we can see it when it comes in. And let's go ahead and use connect and post to important opinions. We're going to do an insert rec.body. Obviously, when you do your API, Don't directly input user data into the database without validation. That's an atrocious idea.
Draw table.
Yes. So Kinix will actually handle the parameterization, so you don't have to worry about like little Bobby tables, user drop tables, and losing all your user data. But it does mean you should still validate your input. But for tonight, we are gonna look the other way. I'm gonna call as callback, error first callback.
So know what column to put that data into?
Yes, because I cheated and made the database table ahead of time, and the database table column names are exactly the same as the Ajax object being sent to me. Now, if that wasn't true, you are correct. I would have to do some kind of mapping of this data goes to that column. Again, cheating, because I did it ahead of time. So if error, res.status 500.send error. Otherwise, res.n, because we're done. Now, I think that's right. Might be an error. Let's find out. Okay, what's our opinion? Good catch. We do have to reload our server because we made changes to it. All right, our opinion. Hi there, Node.js-TL. What's our username? Node.js-TL, Node.js developers. That's who we are. Hey, it showed up. And if I refresh the page, it's also there. So congratulations, you just made a crappy Twitter clone in a couple minutes using Express.
Did that new one show up, like, because your application code says, like, after you send it, retrieves a list?
Yes. Yes, I have a bit of jQuery in there that after it does the post, does a get again, and then just redraws it. You could probably create some kind of system to do that on the fly, but not quite that magical. You can make it do magical things, but a lot of work goes into that. Okay, so congratulations. You've all helped me write your first Node application tonight. And that's the basis of tonight's talk. I'm just going to open the floor up to questions right now to see what you guys want to know about. What questions do you guys have? This IDE editor is actually written in Node. It's called Visual Studio Code. It's by Microsoft. It has one of the best debuggers for Node I've ever seen. Actually, let's take a look at that debugger real quick. So Node, if you type --debug, will launch the debugger. And it listens by default on 5858. On Visual Studio Code, you open the debugger tab. And stop. You have to tell it to add a configuration. It's going to ask you what language you're using. Here?
Yeah, that's going to be loading up.
Okay. I think I'm good if I just attach. So I'm going to attach to port. And that should be good to go. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to put a debug point right there. Touched it. Okay, we're attached. Okay, so you can just go attach the process. And I'm putting a debug point right at the app.get. I'm going to refresh, and there we go.
Can't see that.
Oh, that's what you meant by that. Okay. So there you go.
What's the name of this editor again?
Visual Studio Code. Yeah, it's free, it's lightweight, it's written in Node, it's fantastic. And there's quite a few people at Node.js-TL that absolutely love this little editor. Another great editor that you guys can use is Atom. That's also written in Node.js. That's written by GitHub. Fantastic editor for a number of languages. A lot of people use Sublime. Sublime has decent Node support. I kind of moved on from that a couple years ago, so I don't know how it is these days, but are they up to 4 yet?
Like built-in debugging.
Hmm?
Sublime's great, but it's a text editor. It doesn't have like built-in debugging.
Yeah. And it's kind of when I moved on, is just this one feature was enough to push me over the ledge.
Will this let you debug in production?
Yes, you can debug in production. However, that is a terrible idea.
Not
Be-
necessarily. You can set some debuggers to say, no, you can't change any of the variables, but you can track these variables, and you can find out where it fails.
In that event, there are other solutions that you're going to want to use that isn't the debugger, because the debugger by default gets king access. It has access to all the stack traces, all the memory, and the ability to modify everything on the fly, including live code. So you can inject completely different functions and replace. Yeah, so do not ever do that on production. So, other questions? Anything about Node or Express? What's up in the back? What's that? Yes, if you go to the address right here, just go to github.com/halfshell. It's one of the recently updated repositories. It's called Node.js JSTL Intro Series. You can find, this presentation, all the code and examples, and the completed project that we did tonight. Yeah, and there's a number of great quick start, getting started in Express projects out there. Any other questions? What's up? No? Okay. Yeah.
I'm new to this. When you go to Amazon, you said Amazon uses the Node.js. So you go to Amazon, you walk, front page. Are only the elements that Node.js is being used for, or is it like the entire app?
So Node.js in Amazon is being used at stuff that you don't see. It's being used in the backend. Specifically, if you look at a lot of their services for AWS web services, not the Amazon shopping page, but a lot of their web services have a lot of backends in Node. And if you look at their Lambda service, that's almost entirely powered by Node. In fact, it was first launched with Node because of that. For those of you that don't know, Lambda is basically a service where you write a JavaScript function in Node and you host that function, so that when you hit a certain endpoint, that function is executed. You don't need a server. So if you need that function once a month, it's there. It'll fire up whenever you hit it. Or if you need it 3,000 times in the next second, it's there. It'll just spin up as much as it needs to and die as soon as that function's done executing. So the idea there is serverless. You just write functions for individual app, microservices and work from there. Yeah.
So I'm just getting started looking at Node.js. Does TypeScript fit in anywhere?
Yes, actually, TypeScript, for those of you that don't know, is a variant of JavaScript that Microsoft has made. And like its name, it's basically a typed version of JavaScript. It has a bunch of great features built in. It is excellent with Node. There are basically what are called preprocessors that just convert your code into regular JavaScript, just like how you would use that for the browser. And it brings that down into usable code within Node. And if you like TypeScript, it's an excellent way to write Node. A lot of people do that. And Visual Studio Code is specifically made, has specifically made modules for TypeScript as well. So excellent support there.
Visual Studio Code or Node?
Code. Yes. Any other questions? In the back.
Could I put a node on like a host like GoDaddy? I mean, can I put it wherever?
So GoDaddy, I don't know because I haven't used them in years, but I believe GoDaddy is like a shared PHP host, right? Anybody? So if that's the case, if it's something like CClient, or what is it? Was it CClient? Is it? Okay, yeah. So it sounds like the general consensus is probably not. If you want a cheap host for Node, Heroku has free dynos. You push your Node project up there and just build a server around it. Really easy to do. If you want your own server and don't want to use something like Heroku, you can just pay $5 a month at DigitalOcean. And then Amazon has something called Lightsail, I believe, which is their new like $5 a month server, which they're doing to try to like combat DigitalOcean's pricing. Also, if you buy a Raspberry Pi from Micro Center, great place to host Node.
I think you can run, Node on GoDaddy in the shared house. It's just kind of, it's not going to be as easy to set up as like PHP, which just works out of the box.
Yeah.
Certainly better off with DigitalOcean or Linode or something.
Yeah, especially since the costs are remarkably similar. $5 a month versus, I don't know.
I just asked because I like my domain names there.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, any other questions? Okay, if you have any other questions, I'm here, and Paul in the back is also very good at Node. He is here to answer any questions specifically. And hopefully you guys learned something tonight. I'm going to be sending out a survey in the next day or two. Take the time to answer the survey because it basically helps us guide how we're going to design future meetups. Let me know if you think that we are going to be able to have another one of these in the future. If you would like to see more or of a particular topic, let me know. So thank you very much.